Good morning, everybody. This is apparently for the online people. So I'd like to welcome you here to the Gordon Red Bear Oaks Center. And we're going to just jump into it, so I'm going to be very brief. My name is Dr. Priscilla Satie, and I'm the principal investigator for this project, which all of these people actually produced a lot of the work. And I'm just going to start by talking about briefly the problem of trafficking of women and children. And some of you may have heard that there's this triangle in the Prairie Provinces that we were aware of thanks to the police forces talking about it in the media. And so when Gwen approached me and said, do you think that this is something you could take the lead on, I said, absolutely. It's, the problem has been identified. And later, after the research was done, and each of the women here will talk a little bit about that, we decided that to work with Hope Restored and to use our good offices here at the university to talk about the issue and to act on it, really. Women in the margins, women and children in the margins have the least voices to address the challenges. We as a publicly funded institute have responsibilities to organize our curriculum and our research to respond to the critical state of what are due in large part by budget cutbacks. And I think we need to be very clear to not continue to victimize the women and children, many of whom are Indigenous, but to put the responsibility exactly within the decreasing social support networks that too many citizens in the country, in the province, in the city are experiencing. So I will close at the end with a few words, but I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Gwen Duick.
I'm actually going to put this into here. There we go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Gwen Duick, and I'm part of the research team and also sit on the board of Hope Restored, which is the organization that initiated the project. My role today is to moderate. I'm going to do a few introductions this morning, introduce the research team, introduce a few people that are here in the room with us today, and then kind of coordinate where we're going. In terms of the agenda, after I finish speaking, Manuela and Taylor, who are part of the research team, are going to speak to the process, some of the outcomes, some of the things that we learned, and the recommendations. So they have a formal presentation on that. And then we have a few responses from certain individuals in the room. And then we're going to open it up for questions. So as you're listening, if you have any questions at all, keep them written down or in your mind. And we are going to entertain questions from the entire audience, as well as there are some media in the room, and want to be able to give an opportunity for all of you to ask about the project, ask about what it is that we learned as we were going through this. And that will be our kind of formal launch today. And we are really, really excited to be at this place. This has been a long time in coming. We've been working on this project for 3 years about, and for all kinds of reasons, things got delayed. And number one, being the pandemic, kind of landed in the middle of it and forced us to delay some of our processes, particularly the data collection that we were doing and the interviews, and being able to pull everything together in the way that we wanted to as we went forward. The first organization that I want to acknowledge today is the Prairieaction Foundation. Prairieaction Foundation is the funder of the research. They provided a grant for us. They initiated or did a call for proposals back in 2019, and that's when we applied for the project and were provided with the grant to be able to conduct the research. And Rod McKendrick, who is the vice chair of Prairieaction Foundation, is here with us today and thrilled about that. And he's going to speak as well after we have finished our presentation. For that. I also want to acknowledge the University of Saskatchewan. We're absolutely thrilled that Dr. Priscilla Settee was the principal investigator, and having that connection with the university was important for us and to the broader research community. And I know that Priscilla is a strong voice and advocate for the work that we have done, and in her role now as Vice Dean of Indigenous. Let me start with a few people to acknowledge in the room today. We're really thrilled that Lisa Broda is here. Lisa is the Saskatchewan Advocate for Children and Youth. She's sitting over there, and glad that she's able to join us today. We also have a few MLAs with us here today, and really pleased that they've been able to come. Matt Love is over here, Jennifer Bowes, and Nathaniel Teed as well. And I know that Betty Nippy-Albright registered, but something may have come up and she's not quite here yet to be able to join us. And then also the chair of the board of Hope Restored is here, Daleen Kells, and Daleen will also have an opportunity to respond after we've done our presentation. Just quickly checking to see that I'm not missing anything there. Introducing our team. You've met Dr. Priscilla Settee, who was the principal investigator. She has a long history of research and advocacy in the province, and well-renowned, and a recent recipient of another award, the Saskatchewan, the Platinum Award, the Queen Elizabeth Award. And we were really, really pleased that Priscilla responded to our invitation to be the principal investigator, and she brings lots of experience, lots of background, and asked some very good questions as we were going through, and kept us on track with that as well. And then Dr. Manuela Valle Castro is our research coordinator. Manuela is currently, and I'm going to see if I get this right, the director for the Division of Social Accountability with the College of Medicine here at the University of Saskatchewan. And so a superb fit for her in that role. And she led the research process, helped us to be able to identify all of the right avenues to go down, and gathering the literature together and being able to pull that together. Taylor Bassingthwaite is here with us as well. She was one of our research assistants. Taylor was largely responsible for all the interviews with the various agencies that we interacted with, and gathering all of that together, analyzing that, theming that, and so on. And then Jolene McGill is she is the executive director of Hope Restored, but she was also our research assistant in a sense, and being able to coordinate all of the interactions that we had. The people who are not here in the room that I really want to acknowledge are the members of our advisory committee. They were invaluable to our process. We early on knew that we needed to reach out into the community and hear voices and have participation from other agencies, and especially individuals who have lived experience. And so we invited a broad spectrum of people to become part of the advisory committee. Should also emphasize that this is research that's based here in Saskatoon, here at the U of S, here in Saskatchewan, but the research is broad in the sense that it's looking at all three Prairie Provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. So on our advisory committee, we had people from Alberta and Manitoba. Like I said earlier, we were unfortunate that we couldn't meet in person. The entire research process was done online. And so lots of shifts that we had to make, not being able to actually travel to Manitoba or to Alberta to be able to do some of the interviewing that we had first envisioned. So we had to do some shifting and modifying of that. But our advisory committee members were just absolutely superb in being able to sign on regularly, meet with us, advise us about no, you shouldn't be asking that, or yes, you could be asking that, or this is who you could be in touch with. And so they were extremely helpful. We had lots of agencies that are represented here in Saskatchewan as well. So the Sexual Assault Services of Saskatchewan were represented, Out Saskatoon, Prairie Harm Reduction, Straight Up, both in Prince Albert and in Saskatoon as well. And I'm going to forget some of them, but if you look at the report, you'll be able to see who the local agencies that were represented. And then, of course, we had individuals like Dr. Julie Kay, Marilyn Putra, who were individuals represented on the advisory committee, and then the individuals from Manitoba and Saskatchewan. This is the report. There are paper copies of it at the side that you can take with you, and I know that afterwards, Heather, I should acknowledge Heather's work. Heather has been super supportive in being able to pull this all together, put the event onto Eventbrite, book the space, planned for some snacks here for us, and arranged for all the details. And Heather is going to send out a link afterwards, I believe. Or you've already done that. It's already happened. If you go to your email, you'll have a link to the PDF as well, so that you can look at that, and then the paper copy to take away. That gives you a bit of a sense of what's in the report, and we hope that you'll dive right into it and read it as well. Yeah, what else did I want to say about that? So back to the beginning a little bit. I mentioned that in 2019, when the call for proposals was put out by Prairieaction Foundation, we applied, were granted the funds, and following that, invited or pulled together the research team, invited people that we thought were interested in the research to join the team, started to do our work to kind of map out what it is that what we were hoping for, best case scenario, and then the modifications that had to occur through that. So gathered lots of data through interviews with specific agencies. We shifted our focus from talking with those who were being trafficked or exploited, shifted to the agencies, and took a bit of a different view of that. And we'll hear a little bit more from Manuela and Taylor about the shifts that we made in that. And that came from the advisory committee. And that's a really important piece for us to emphasize, that this wasn't us deciding where we were going to go with this. We responded to the voices of those in the community, to the voices of those with lived experience, and wanted to make sure that we were amplifying those voices and their words that you see throughout the report, their comments. You can see some very specific comments there, but the themes that they identified for us were critical to where this project ended up going. And we are grateful to them and grateful to the team for the incredible work that they did. With that, I think, if I didn't miss introducing anyone in the room, which is, anyway, I will turn it over to Dr. Manuela Valle-Castro and to Taylor Bassingthwaite to present the report and some highlights from that.
Thanks, Gwen, and thank you everyone for taking the time to show up. Thanks for being here. You're clearly all busy folks, and recognizing this work by being here, I think, witnesses what is held within this. So thank you for taking that time. If you will allow me, I would like to take about 5 minutes to tell you a story, tell you the story of our methodology. Gwen had challenged me a little bit when we were coming together to put this information in a coherent fashion of what was done and what was said. She said, think about it like a story. What would that story sound like? So again, if you'll allow me 5 minutes, I'd like to read you the story from one person's perspective, of course. It's just my perspective, but I'd like to share it with you. Excuse me. I knew this work was important. I knew I wanted to contribute. I knew the hearts and minds of the mighty folks involved were resolute and brave. I had no idea the journey itself would ultimately move us towards acting in a new paradigm of thought, so deeply required for unlearning and realizing shared human rights. We knew what we didn't want to do. We didn't want to take. We didn't want to research and retell, duplicating what so many have already sweat and bled to voice. We knew engaging in a process and systems rigidly tied to and born out of the ongoing legacies of colonialism were surely not the path out of colonialism to truth sharing and an equitable and inclusive society. After a uniquely, or perhaps not, lengthy cycling to achieve the required institutional ethics approval, we were ready to move forward. We spent time with practitioners who supported us in understanding trauma-informed perspectives and how we would deliberately connect with folks who have lived and living experience in right and meaningful ways. When we spoke about northern Saskatchewan especially, not like PA Central, but the North, there was a heavy uneasiness about the extraction of story. I have witnessed and been involved with mining stories in the past. The landscape is scattered with the parachutes of people who came to extract this precious gift to advance the goals of someone or something else under the banner of Here to Help. We knew we had to do different to get to different, and here is when we knew this was not a narrow path. It needed to be wide and far-reaching and have space for many. The approach needed to be constructively, collaboratively, iteratively, intentionally, and lovingly co-designed. Out of this need, the advisory committee, the AC as we called it, was born. Early on, we conducted an environmental scan, mapping the organizations and people who are part of the community along what we referred to as the continuum of services and care offered to the folks with whom we plan to speak. We also observed early on that education and awareness are the most emphasized, to which Manuela will share more about this in our findings. As we set out to invite organizations to join the advisory committee with the aim to help guide and share wisdom, it became clear there are deeply entrenched, often dueling viewpoints between many in this community, and yet we contended it was a community all the same, a fractal of our larger community as a whole, and that our advisory committee would welcome all viewpoints, recognizing that wisdom could be achieved in convening and hosting a third space for views to be shared and discussions to take place. The net was cast wide. A long list of people and groups from across all 3 provinces were invited. Some accepted and some declined once our list of members was shared. Others also walked alongside for the more than 2 years of this project, offering their generosity, endless discretionary efforts, resiliency, authentic and transparent viewpoints, and passion for this timely effort. And then there was a global pandemic. Because of the backdrop and limitations created by that, we started to move away from the interviews we had planned. Our advisory committee was very clear about virtual interviewing being a no-go. At this same time, a shift was happening, a move away from the mining of stories, for they've been brought already to the surface. A shift towards holding systems accountable was emerging. I remember the air changing with this. We were on yet another Zoom call, all together and lockdown, separated across the country. A member of the group challenged us. Why are the systems getting off? I'm sick of not talking about what causes all of this. What's causing all this is what needs our focus. From this fork in the path, our direction of travel changed. As we planned for interviews, we would now be focusing on systems and would speak to people and organizations across the spectrum, focusing not on individuals, but rather on the systems in place that are perfectly designed to get the results we are getting. Perhaps here is where it needs to be said again. This effort, from its inception to call to action, has been a walk taken together, with folks joining for part of the path or length of what was created. An iterative process of learning and growth, trust building, transparency, and accountability, supportive and kind at a time and in a space of uncertainty. So now, as this path of work narrows to its conclusion, having experienced the collective will and call to action that you're all part of here today, a new path is ready to be forged. Manuel?
Thank you. I also hope that what we're sharing today advances the justice that our children and women and people that are most vulnerable in our prairie provinces, that we focus on their safety and their integrity, and that everything that we do ends up advancing and improving their lives, which is the ultimate goal of this research. So, as Taylor said, we shifted the focus from people that have been over-researched and extracted to the systems that have been getting off the hook and holding them accountable, but also working with the agencies, with the frontline agencies that are dealing with the most vulnerable people, and listen to their analysis and their voices. We also conducted a broad literature review, and you will all see it in the report. But basically, something that we discovered is that this topic is not new. It has been, there's abundant research, analysis, research evidence that points at how human trafficking is not just bad people getting innocent people to make bad choices. That framework is taking us to paths of action that are not working. In particular, we identified that the two most consistent system responses in the 3 prairie provinces to the problem of human trafficking are concentrated in incarceration and in education and awareness. And that the premises of both of these streams of action are not supported by the evidence. So we talk in the report how further incarceration is an unacceptable response in a context of over-incarceration of vulnerable people. And also because the evidence points at how there's pathways from one institution to others. So for example, we know that there's huge connections between child apprehension or foster care and incarceration and trafficking, and that these circuits are connected. So something that we need to interrupt immediately is the cycle of incarceration of vulnerable people and not concentrate. The best way that we can support our police systems is to remove the burden of dealing with complex intergenerational social issues to actually address the root causes that are producing the problems that we deem as problems of public safety, but that cannot be resolved, again, with further incarceration. In a similar fashion, we the evidence showed that education and awareness campaigns that start from the premise that people need information to make good choices is not supported by the evidence. We again see that the things that stabilize people and support them into making those good choices are things like housing, access to safe and transport when you live in a remote and rural community, access to social supports, and so there's a little bit of a history of why we have been addressing this problem with education and awareness, and it's because despite our good intentions, we've been looking at the problem with a deficit thinking model, meaning that we have been looking at the people that are vulnerable as if they're lacking information, lacking good morals, lacking intelligence, or lacking something that we can provide them and help them as individuals to make the good choices. And that's just not supported by the evidence. So we analyzed in the report how our different systems, such as child and family services and social services, are actually implicated in the reproduction of multiple vulnerabilities, in having folks fall through the cracks of lacking housing, lacking transport, lacking childcare, etc. All these things compound so that when we end up finding 2 youth in the back of a truck in rural Alberta, that situation, if we sort of like do the reverse engineering of how that happened, we can literally name what are all the systems that failed and that ended up in that and resulted in that situation. So our recommendations, again, are consistent with everything that the evidence and things like the TRC calls to action and the inquiry calls to justice are. It's consistent with what they have been pointing at the fact that we don't need to fund any more police and incarceration or education and awareness, and that if we want to improve the social outcomes as well as the public safety of our communities, we need to address the root causes, and by means of prioritizing housing, prioritizing, as we said, social supports, in particular transport in a context of high rurality and the vulnerability that living in isolation and in remote areas represents for women and children in particular. Have I missed something? Okay. So, yes, well, we also discovered about the ways that our 3 provinces are addressing human trafficking by emphasizing police and incarceration and education and awareness, is that the resources, our money, is being spent with no social return of investment, right? Meaning that money just, unless we're planning on making money of incarceration, which I don't think is the case, there's no social return of investment. And on the other hand, it reinforces colonial and racist narratives of deficit of people who are incarcerated or who are institutionalized, as presenting them again as somehow inferior and unable to achieving the same outcomes. Whereas we have evidence that when we prioritize, focusing on redressing the social and human rights of our communities, and again, making our systems accountable for ensuring these social and human rights, when we prioritize the well-being and the development of communities, public safety immediately increases. Community cohesion increases public safety, and the well-being and addressing the human rights of people increases public safety. And it's a sustainable model of using our pennies. So we recommend for our governments that really are concerned with issues like the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit folks, as well as provinces and governments that are serious about addressing human trafficking. We have evidence-based recommendations in this report. And as we have been repeating, they absolutely talk about prioritizing basic human and social rights and interrupting the cycles of family separation, community separation, incarceration, and further institutionalization of marginalized folks. We also have recommendations for the frontline agencies and the nonprofits and the community-based organization who have been doing very important work. And we really want to acknowledge that the work that Not interestingly enough, it's mostly women in the nonprofit sector doing this kind of job. So there's layers there of how we can understand also the precarity of this work. But they're stretching their resources and working with very scarce resources and scarce support from the government to address the needs of vulnerable folks. And sometimes they are so in the everyday, they're so concerned with the survival of their organizations that they don't necessarily have the time or the space to reflect about their practice and how it may be contributing also to some parts of the problem. So we talk about the legacy of our charitable sector and nonprofit sector, how it's been attached to an identity of rescuing and saving, which we need to examine, and we need to really reflect on this dynamic of saving, what it does, how it presents the other, how it presents who the problem is, right? Who needs to be fixed. And it's not vulnerable people that needs to be fixed. It's the systems that are producing the vulnerabilities and reproducing and sustaining those cycles of vulnerability. So I hope you'll take the time to read our report with attention. We didn't make it too long, and I think it's very engaging. So we are happy to support further your organizations by talking more about this report and our findings, and hopefully will translate into some action in our 3 provinces again that focus on the safety and the integrity of women and children that are facing ongoing vulnerabilities and violence in our provinces, because it's very unnecessary. We can absolutely prevent it. It's not there's no natural thing happening here that we're witnessing. It's very produced by what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuela, and thank you, Taylor. Really appreciate the approach that they, as members of the team, have taken throughout the entire research project. And just listening to them again today, I'm so encouraged and heartened, and it's been an absolute pleasure to work with them as they interacted with all of the agencies that we were interviewing, gathered all of the themes and views, and we analyzed those together and critiqued our own systems and structures that are in place. I want to, just before we move to the responses from some of the others who are here today, I want to give credit to the artist as well, who, as Manuela was waving her report around, there's some beautiful artwork. If nothing else, you need to go look at the artwork in the report. Just look at the pictures. They're great. And a local artist, a man named Leonard Whitehead, who we happened upon his art, I think it's displayed in a gas station on 22nd Street. So if you want to go buy a piece of his art, go buy gas there. Well, no, don't buy gas there. Go there just to buy his artwork. Leonard is a local artist, and when we came across his artwork, we thought it would be just fabulous to be able to take his images and infuse them throughout the report, and they are beautiful. This is one of the pieces that he did for that, and we're pleased to be able to just display that, and it represents so well the interactions and the relationships that we wanted to emphasize in the report. So some responses to the report and the process. I'm going to start with you, Rod. Rod McKendrick is with the Government of Saskatchewan. Not today. Sorry. I shouldn't say that. But Rod is here in his role with the Prairieaction Foundation. He is the vice chair. And as I've said, we've acknowledged the support that we got from Prairieaction and have invited Rod to come and speak on behalf of the organization and give a response to the things that you've heard or read and so on. We presented an interim report to them back in 2021, I think it was, had to do that online. And then, of course, we're able to submit the final report to them in 2022. So take it away, Rod.
Thank you, Gwen. I think everybody can hear me okay. Thank you, Dr. Setti, for starting us off this morning. Much appreciated. Good morning, everyone, honored colleagues, academics, community members, and students. We are pleased to have this opportunity to speak to you on behalf of the Prairieaction Foundation to honor this very important work on human trafficking. We were pleased to fund this tri-provincial Prairie Province initiative with the hope of casting further light on the issue in the prairie context. As it is well known that the egregious harm and trauma girls, women, and two-spirit people face because of neglect, exploitation, trafficking, and incarceration, and there is more as well, continues to persist. And we know that Indigenous girls and women experience all of this at a far greater rate than their non-Indigenous counterparts. This work and the next steps will be an integral piece to creating a path toward change through action, commitment, and resources. We thank those at Hope Restored, and Dr. Priscilla Setti for the work on this project. Thanks, Dr. Setti. For over 25 years, the Prairieaction Foundation has been working to change the story of violence and abuse in the Canadian prairies. Our foundation, through grant funding, supports action-oriented research that is grounded in finding solutions to violence that lead to better outcomes for our communities. We know that research tells us what programs work and what responses are working. Our primary goals are to connect researchers in universities with community-based organizations in the area of violence, to create the knowledge necessary to help lawmakers, policymakers, and practitioners to make decisions that will help reduce the incidence of violence in our communities. We do this by not only community-based research grants in violence and abuse, but also by creating and promoting education and awareness about violence in our society and how the work in developing action-oriented solutions to solve these issues comes from the communities. Embracing of the principles of reconciliation and the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action and embedding these in as part of our research provides a strong foundation, support, and partnership with Indigenous families and communities who have historically and continue to experience staggering rates of violence due to the devastating consequences of colonization, residential schools, and the 60s scoop. What we are doing here today is embracing action. Prairieaction envisions a future where all cultures in our society are free from violence and abuse, and we believe that we can make a difference by finding solutions through the funding we provide to do this very important work. Prairieaction's objective for today and into the future is to continue to focus on action on the ground, create awareness, find solutions, and improve the lives of those affected by violence and abuse. The Prairieaction Foundation is pleased to be here and take part in this event and to continue the dialogue on this critical issue. We hope everyone attending today is encouraged by all the knowledge, wisdom, experiences, and guidance shared today, and that it sparks ideas for new solutions, interventions, and prevention work on human trafficking. Because we know that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to actions are the pathway for a better future for Indigenous children, families, communities, and all Canadians. Just as an aside, we continue to provide funding for research and education even after this piece of research, and in the coming months, we'll be posting call-outs on our webpage. Stay tuned. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you, Rod, for those very important words and the response that you've provided today. And I want to convey to you, which you can convey to the rest of your board, the appreciation that we have as an organization for the support that we received from you throughout, and certainly for the financial support that we received from the foundation. You've heard me reference, and you'll see it in the report, Hope Restored. Hope Restored is a local nonprofit organization that provides support and programming for women and two-spirit individuals, transgendered individuals that are choosing to exit situations where they have been trafficked or sexually exploited. And so today I'm going to introduce a couple of people that are associated with Hope Restored and invite them to talk a little bit more about their response to the report and to the good work that is being done in supporting those who are choosing to leave those situations. A couple of board members, a past board member, Jody Kozan is here. Jody's no longer on the board, but she was in the past and certainly involved in the early days of the organization. I'm going to invite our current chair, Daleen Kells, to come and respond, have a few words, and then Jolene, you can just come right after Daleen. Jolene is the executive director, and she can talk a little bit about the implications of the recommendations that came out of this research for the organization and for the work that we do.
Thanks, Gwen. And thank you to everybody that did the research as well, too. I think that this is pretty powerful. Speaking on behalf of Hope Restored Canada and looking at it from the board's perspective, it was interesting for me to see that we're kind of feeding a problem. And so that was enlightening. You know, we're pretty happy and pleased with some of the impact that we're making just as an organization with Hope Restored Canada and being able to support the individuals that have exited. And certainly it's not an easy decision. It's something that it's important to do. And we need to be there in order to support the individuals that do need to be able to exit and have a safe environment, a house, the proper supports, the food. I heard all of the security pieces. That's something that we stand for. And if we can address some of the systemic issues along the way as well, too, that have been highlighted by the report, that would be fantastic. Certainly, this is something that's going to take all of us in the room to be able to try and address. And, you know, we're so thankful for Prairieaction Foundation and the funding that went towards this research. And we're hopeful that there will be more research in order to be able to continue this so we can learn from this and be able to make a greater impact that does truly matter. So thank you so much. Great.
I'm a little taller than everybody else, so I'll hold the mic. First off, I just want to thank you all for coming to hear and learn about this important research and the important findings that our team found. And I want to say a big thank you to the crew that's sitting behind us here. If you have not met these individuals, they are brilliant minds and have really been able to connect with not only the agencies, but our AC and really listen and learn as we go. And so I want to thank our team so much for the work that you guys did. As a frontline agency, we had the honor and privilege of not only learning and listening, but also seeing how the findings that we were finding were aligning with what our participants were saying. And so I remember sitting in many meetings and we would hear things from our AC members or from the research that was coming out and saying, yep, this aligns with what our participants are saying, what we're experiencing in program, the things that they are saying that they have gone through or endured throughout their life. And so for us, this research really has brought to light some of the things that we were facing on a regular basis. And so as an agency, at the end of the report, really there's an evaluation framework for nonprofits and how we can move forward and do this work in a good way. And that is something that we are really taking to heart as an agency. How do we do this, and how do we reshape maybe the philosophy of how we work with our participants? How do we reshape how we empower and advocate rather than sit beside and say, this is the best way forward for you? And I'm happy to say that we have some incredible staff that we get to work with, that they truly see themselves as advocates for the individuals that we get to work with. And they don't show up to work every day with an agenda in mind of how we need to move forward. They show up with, hey, I want to be present, I want to listen, and let's make what's best for this individual that we're working with. And so I'm really proud that we have staff that embody some of the things that we get to do. For us, some of the things that really stuck out, one is recognizing that the nonprofit sector does make and is making huge strides forward in when we are looking at how we are working with and how we're moving forward to assist those who are maybe experiencing or have lived experience with this issue. And I will say definitely our findings of how nonprofits are often working in scarcity and trying to stretch our resources, that doesn't support us in being able to change some of those systems and to empower instead of disempower the people that we're working with. And so that's one thing for us as an agency, is how can we continue to find those stable resources so that we can help to deconstruct some of those systems that are continuously keeping this cycle of exploitation happening to the people that we get to work with. Another finding for us is really, how do we just continue to be learners and listeners as we move forward? We know that the people that we work with, they are the experts. The people from our AC committees, those with living experience, they are the experts and the ones we need to continue to listen to and learn from as we move forward. And so how do we position ourselves as an agency, as a frontline service provider, to be able to continuously do that? The other piece is about how do we work with and provide those necessary needs from day one. So the stable housing, some of those transportation pieces, how do we advocate for that? But how do we also maybe step in and be a changing place as an agency to be able to provide some of those things? So for us, this report was enlightening. And like I said, we took the position of a learner, but it's also something that we are going to take as an organization and say, how do we implement this to actually be change makers in our industry and not just follow the status quo that has existed within the nonprofit realm? So if you are unfamiliar with Hope Restored, it's been mentioned a little bit, but we are a local agency based out of Saskatoon that works on the front lines with those who have lived and living experience. And so we do have a home in the city for those who are wanting to exit and are ready to kind of leave that life behind them. But we also have support groups in the community for people who are not there yet, but they're still saying, I need connection. I need a place where I can be seen. I need a place where I can be known. And so we do also offer those supports in the community as well. And so I'd highly encourage you, check out our website, learn a little bit more about us, share this report and who we are with people around you. This is a very important topic, and it's something that we don't want to go silent after today. The things that we have learned in this report are things that we want to be able to advocate for and promote and see change with. So I highly encourage you, take the report, read it, and also share what you are learning with other people and share about Hope Restored and this research with others. So thank you so much for coming today, and thank you to our incredible team again. But I look forward to how we continue to move this topic forward together.
Thank you, Daleen, and thank you, Jolene, as well. Excuse me, for your comments. Want to also acknowledge this mic and that camera back there are recording this whole event today, and it will be posted on YouTube and some other sites as well, so that if you know of somebody who you think could have been here or was just not able to be here, you can direct them there and they can hear about the report as well. And I want to acknowledge the support that we received from Sexual Assault Services of Saskatchewan through Patience Umar-Waneza. And Patience is sitting there at the back. Patience was also one of our project advisors, and SAS offered to fund the recording of this event, and we are incredibly grateful that they have done that. It's not inexpensive to have somebody come and record it and prepare that for us. So we are just immensely grateful for that, and know that it will be available beyond just today for that reason. So my appreciation, our appreciation to you, Patience, for the incredible support that you've provided and that your organization has provided to the project as well. So with that, that's all of us at the front talking. We want to give you an opportunity for questions. I'll just moderate those. We will pass the mic to, you can direct it at one person if you want to, or you can direct it generally, and we'll figure out how to do that. Like
Thank
this.
you very much. This has been extremely informative. Just to let people know, I am an MLA with the opposition. I'm a human rights critic and our critic for status of women. We've met some colleagues and I in the past with Hope Restored and learned a bit more about the organization. I would like to know, and it's a big question, but I would like to know as the opposition how we could be advancing legislative changes that will impact human trafficking and trafficking of women and girls in Saskatchewan.
I think what we need are our MLAs to really try to push through in the 3 provinces is that we implement a housing first policy, and that's the #1 recommendation that comes out of this. And in particular, we're thinking about women that have been de-incarcerated, youth that ages out of foster care, youth moving out of the reserve into the city. There's folks that need to be immediately guaranteed safe and stable housing, and that is a barrier that prevents a cascade of other opportunities for vulnerability to present, as well as in the case of Saskatchewan, to reinstate an affordable and accessible transport system in rural and remote communities. But ultimately is needed in the 3 provinces, that there is guaranteed access to movement for women that need to leave situations of violence, people that need to go to appointments. I mean, that creates a dire situation that ends up in people, and specifically young women, being put in very unsafe situations because of lack of transport, right? So even just addressing those 2 first policies, housing first and guaranteed transport in remote and rural communities, that would make a huge impact. And on the other hand, to continue to make our governments aware that further incarceration of Indigenous people, and in particular women, is absolutely unacceptable. We need to go the other way. We need to de-incarcerate and decongest our justice system, because this is the other thing. If we focus on housing and transport, we'll decongest policing, so we'll decongest the justice system and the healthcare system, which right now is overburdened by situations. We know that we have the police dealing with situations of homelessness, of having to find people rides. So they are having to act as social workers, and they're not equipped for that. Or we have people that end up spending the night in prison because there's no other way of housing, or at the hospital. That's how we're dealing with emergency housing. So those 3 things, if our politicians and our policymakers and our decision makers can be very aware that those are the recommendations that are coming from the evidence, it would be fantastic.
I'd just like to emphasize what Manuela is saying insofar as the voices that we heard from, who, for example, are stakeholders and actors within healthcare and the justice system, specifically police and frontline healthcare workers. Those with whom we spoke, were also very supportive of this, recognizing that this isn't working for us, right? We don't want to be doing this. We want those supports and those wisdom practices, and we want the right, people working in the right scope, right? The right people doing the right job makes a huge difference. And so many of those folks that we talk to that were stakeholders are supportive of that, and very supportive, I must say. Hope Restored had quite the reputation. Folks were supportive of the work that they were doing, and recognize that if perhaps some monies can go to the organization's front facing as opposed to more into some of these larger massive domains, that's going to get you a heck of a lot more impact for your buck.
I think that the things that you're talking about happen because people are concerned. And for sure, First Nations and Métis communities cannot do this work by ourselves, that we need solidaritous support across the board, that people need to understand the depths of the problem and question what their role in solutions are. So any chance I ever get, I really work with a different team of people across the board. And I also push the limits of a publicly funded institution like the University of Saskatchewan. Earlier, we talked about the role of the College of Law. This is where we train young scholars to be part of the solution or part of the problem. So we need to be very mindful that knowledge is power, that we have this opportunity here, and we must never let our guard down, even though we've seen, some decreases in funding. We all have. And so it means that we have to become a little bit more strategic and build those alliances now.
If I may, even when we're talking about the housing first policy, we're not saying government do it all. There is ways, innovative, in creative ways of partnering with the nonprofit and the private sector. And we have, of course, the evidence in Medicine Hat, right, which is the example of homelessness zero that can be, our policies could be modeled after that.
So other questions? There's one at the back there.
My name is Kaylee Rocco. I'm the Executive Director for Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Just building on some of the comments that were made around transportation and housing, one of the things that we've really seen as a detriment is the discontinuation of STC, of the Saskatchewan Transportation Company, has had a huge effect on many of our northern and rural clients in terms of being able to access abortion services. Because again, it's only Saskatchewan and Regina where you can access surgical abortion. Were you hearing that narrative within your research of the sort of the discontinuation of that publicly funded transportation system having a huge impact on your populations in the north?
Absolutely, yes. And not only from our stakeholders and partners, but there's also research done here in the province. There's a Dr. Jacob Al-Hassan who has done a study on the impacts in healthcare in particular, access to healthcare by the interruption of the STC. So we have not only anecdotal evidence, but we have research that backs that up.
100%.
Okay, Lisa?
Thank you. I don't know if you hear me on with the mic or not, but I'll speak loudly. Thank you. I'm here as a Saskatchewan advocate for children and youth, and more of a comment than it is questions. I've read your report already, and certainly some very meaningful work coming from the experiential, lived experiences of those that you spoke to. I just want to say that I think it's critical work in the sense that, it's honoring the rights of those people with their experiences who came to you with that. And that, we need to make sure we're considering children, young girls, young women in the context of their rights under the UNCRC, but also under UNDRIP, which is United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People, and particularly Article 22 on that, which I know many here will be familiar with, and the importance of those rights and how there is a responsibility and obligation of the state, if you will, under the United Nations Convention, for sure, to honor those rights of children who are going through systems. So I think that the important part, I support about this work is that it sets the tone for the Prairie Provinces. As a Saskatchewan advocate for children, certainly, we support that work that's going to make better outcomes for young people, children and young people, and certainly those young people move into the adult world. So I certainly just want to comment on that because I have to leave, and so I'll miss the rest of the dialogue. But thank you so much, Dr. Sethi, for leading the work, and Hope Restored, Jolene, the board's support there for the work, and really appreciate what you're doing here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. We really appreciate that you took time to be here with us today. I think you had a question, is that correct? Yeah. Want to turn around and maybe they can all hear you a little bit better.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Sherry. I'm with Victim Services here at the police station. I appreciate this research. I don't get to the university too much anymore, so it's nice to get my mind back in that. I'm a sociologist. This sounds a lot like I used the methodology of institutional ethnography in my research, so this kind of brings me back. Anyway, my question for you is, there was a point where you spoke about how incarceration and education and awareness are not working. So I'm curious to hear more about the education and awareness part not working.
Right, so the education and awareness piece has to do with campaigns, educating people about for example, online risks or how to detect somebody. And a lot of money is spent in this kind of and they're premised again on the idea that the individuals are lacking information to make the right decision, right? And we have found out that it's not about having or not having the information. It's not about knowing that trafficking is dangerous, or it's really about needing a ride or a place to stay, or the space of criminality that you have grown into just because you've been institutionalized systematically. So that's what we mean. We of course, education and awareness sounds great for a lot of things, right? We're always like, oh, we need to fix this by education. What kind of education? Because the problem with this particular type of education and awareness is that it reinforces the idea that there's people that make the right choices, right? And they are sort of morally superior than the people that are making the bad choices and ending up in jail, right? Which is a false premise. People are needing rights and a place to stay, right? With or without the information.
And I think we need to convince politicians that we don't need a $1 billion remand center for people who haven't been charged. That money would be a lot better served by, upping the budgets back to prairie harm reduction. And our government needs to hear this. And our universities need to hear this. So we really, we're on a trajectory of funding things that add to the problem instead of, why can't we have a safe transportation system? Why can't we have social housing that Canada was once famous for? It's not rocket science. I should have been a physician. Anyway.
Heather has a question.
So first of all, thank you for doing the research. It's extremely important to have. My question is, a lot of what's been mentioned is their physical environment, right? So their circumstances of life. Whereas my question is, what did you see a correlation with complex PTSD or the cycles of trauma? So how are those being correlated with the incidence of human trafficking? And is there recognition by the services
that there are occurrences of complex trauma.
This is interesting because it overlaps with the study that we did with other partners here on this gender-based violence, basically. And what we find is that these usually are not like a one incident event that happen to vulnerable women, right? It's not that they experience one sexual assault and one instance of being trafficked. The gender violence is like the structure of their life entirely, right? There's a constant having to deal with the compounded impacts of vulnerability, violence, and trauma, right? And of course, that's why trauma is intergenerational, right? Because when it's not addressed or treated, then it goes forward to the next generation. And those are the type of cycles that we need to interrupt by, for example, keeping families together, giving Indigenous people the sovereignty of their children, right? These are the things that actually are gonna address those forms of trauma, not individual approaches to, like we want the supports for the individuals, but that's not gonna revert the whole, it's, you know, the old metaphor of trying to save babies from a water, but they keep falling, right? It's like, well, why don't we just stop throwing them in the water?
Thank you so much. What inspiring research. And I'm so impressed by the integrity and courage of this work. You know, one of the things that sits with me are the ways that privilege and complicity are connected. And so I think about things like the ways that businesses can actually become involved in money laundering for sex work, right? People that sit next to the vulnerable in religious buildings, or that sit, you know, in positions of responsibility around commerce, right? And I think about shadow pandemics. And so, you know, the ways that not only did everybody have to pivot into mediated spaces for research, but so did sex work, so did trafficking, right? Sort of pivoted into that space, and we're seeing increases in really polished use of digital systems, right, for exploitation. So I'm thinking about sort of the ways that this research also, I think, invites people to think about how privilege is absolutely implicated, right? So we can call on our institutions, but I think we also need to recognize that there's all kinds of facilitation that's going on, where people start to think about sex work as a rite of passage. I mean, I'm just thinking about all those news stories about Hockey Canada and the cadets and the RCMP, and, you know, where sexual violence is just built into privileged identity making. Absolutely, while we're imprisoning the targets, right? And, you know, folks who are kind of getting away with that kind of behavior are helping to make the decisions that affect the sector, right? So I just like to hear a little bit about focusing on the operations of privilege as part of the problem.
Yes, it is. No, you're absolutely right, and that's part of, like, we need that places of decision making go beyond the bias of the people that are actually sitting in those tables, to listen to the living and lived experiences and the needs of the frontline organizations and all these voices. Because you're right, I think that particularly the private sector, who is aggressively profiting from a lot of these communities, just don't get to be held accountable for the impacts that they have in terms of devastating communities and you know, the social and environmental impacts that they bring.
And you know, when we started this research, it was frightening because we were in just after Jeffrey Epstein was convicted. And, you know, south of the 49th parallel, I work with Indigenous women who are being routinely targeted to be taken away on these large ocean liners. And it's really disgusting because this male insatiability has moved into babies. And babies are now being targeted as the victims of sexual exploitation and, you know, disappearance. So when we started looking at this, we realized that, you know, this is really part of a global challenge and problem where the Queen's son was implicated, but they have these layers of protection that we're talking about that it's, you know, we don't want to talk about it as, you know, the full range of it. So it starts here, but it's much bigger.
And I think that what you're pointing at, and I'm getting out, is that, yeah, similar to the study that we did with SAS, the concentration of power and wealth is not good for children and women in general. The more inequitable those power relations, the more potential for exploitation and violence.
And similarly to what the report was talking about and how Manuela spoke about, how are we, like our society disempowers and speaks about how they're bad people because they're making these poor choices, and how we need to change how our society is viewing individuals and taking away some of that deficit discourse, because that is also feeding into the cycle that we are seeing that you're talking about, how there's a power differential. And I can say, as a frontline service provider, the amount of stories that we hear of that power differential, whether it is from religious institutions or within a workplace or within an education system, where we are seeing that these individuals are being preyed upon because they are viewed as a person, a bad person, or somebody that isn't able to make good choices for themselves, or they don't understand or know. And so that person then exploits them based on what they are perceiving of that individual. So definitely, I think how we also view the people that we are working with, and how do we change the societal way that we're looking at people who are coming from these different demographics is also important to consider.
My name is Mariah. I'm with the Saskatchewan RCMP, and my question kind of piggybacks off of yours, Jennifer. And oftentimes we read in these reports looking at the systems, right, and the perpetuating circumstances of vulnerability that the systems are creating with a number of these individuals that we're encountering on the justice side and within other systems. And I guess my question from today is, for those of us that aren't in government and we're working within these systems, what can we do within our individual roles when we're not necessarily in roles to be able to reshape how these systems and governments are working? What can I do and what can constables do and other individuals within these systems to help start change that discourse and reshape the way that we're looking at these individuals as rather than just, you know, that's my question.
Thank you. So we think that, again, to support what the justice and healthcare systems that are overburdened, I mean, I would say never underestimate the power of interrupting a discourse, right, in your own organization. If you're able to even raise questions and bring this report for review to your organization, bring voices from the community that are critical of these interventions or that can support what you're saying. And I mean, I say this with the caveat that I understand how hard it is to work within organizations to change those narratives, but I think it's absolutely possible, because here we are talking about it in, you know, the University of Saskatchewan. So I think that we have to, I mean, it's kind of like, I don't want to say to have the courage, but we have to have the integrity to bring these conversations to our organizations, and in a way that is, again, hard on the issue, soft on the person, right? Nobody's individually responsible for any of these issues. It's a collective